up right now. Ooh.
All
Okay.
right.
Hey. It's
Hold on.
been
I hear an echo of myself in your. Well, I guess it's gone now. Never mind.
okay. Okay, I was about to say I don't. Okay, that's good. That's what a relief. Oh, righty. Okay, now you just went out the screen.
Hmm. Let's swap to the other camera.
Okay, that's it.
There we
That's it.
go.
That's it. Okay, now that's right. Look that way. Look where the direction in which you're looking right now. That's it. That's
All
it.
right.
Okay. All right. We got it. Yay. And we are up now in, let me give it 10 seconds. Hey, Ashley. Hey, RJW, Snowman. Bernadette, you know it. Ashley, sending you all so much love. Everybody, like and share, like and share, like and share. I need you to do that. You help us with the algorithm. Like and share. We're getting a lot of traction after the facts, but I need you all to like and share in real time and tell people about the show. And let them know. Okay, of course, you know it's Tuesday, so you know what time it is. By the time we hear the broadcast, it will be Wednesday. It is Bryce Green time here on the Santita Jackson Show. In five, four. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you today. There's so much that is going on inside of the United States and outside of the United States. And it seems that we are at the center of so much. So let's get to it with Bryce Green. I want you to please meet me on Blue Sky at santitajackson.bsky.social and X at Santita J at Santita J. It's also the Santita Jackson Show, but I prefer Santita J. And then, of course, Santita Jackson and Friends on Facebook, Santita Jackson IG on Instagram. And then, of course, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. I understand that you all have been having some trouble getting me to stream there. So, but just keep at it. And if you can't get me there, always go over to Facebook and to X. And everybody like and share, like and share, like and share. We've got a lot to talk about today. The government shutdown, the implications of that, and what's happening overseas, Venezuela, on what about Somalia? What about Gaza? There is a new alliance that we're beginning to see forged, that they're talking about it now, between African nations and Russia. That's not new, but they are outpacing the West, namely the United States, in terms of their friendly relations with African nations, although that is not a surprise. That is something that has been ongoing for a long time. It's just that's a very interesting time for us to notice that as America is trying to really find its footing in a multipolar world. That is, it's not us and everybody else, it is us amongst everybody else. And not everybody else, amongst us, amongst everyone. So I want you to please meet me, like and share, like and share, like and share. Let's talk about that. Hey, Miss Zenobia and Robert and Snowman and Ashley and Bernadette. She says, please like and share, everybody. And I want to extend my love to everyone on this Veterans Day. Originally, it was Armistice Day. Armistice Day. We're going to be talking with Veterans for Peace in the next hour about that. And then, in the next hour after that, yes, you're going to get three shows today. We'll be talking about the vote and the threat to the vote. In the midst of this shutdown, how will all of this impact 2026? And really, we don't even need to get that far, not deep into the midterm season, but the continuing resolution, which more than likely will be signed by the president. Well, what's going to happen in January? Because by the time we have to have this discussion again, you will have been on the exchange. You will see what your health care costs, what your health care is going to cost you. Maybe that's why the president is considering rushing out $2,000 checks. Only for many people, that will cover a month or two. So we've got to talk about this today. And let's start right here with you, Bryce Green. Bryce, how can we reach you on Substack, Blue Sky? Where can we reach you on social media?
You know, that now that you mention it, maybe I should start getting back on Blue Sky. Blue
I
Sky, things
think
are happening
so.
there. I know
I
people
think
aren't as combative and angry as they are on Twitter, it seems, but I am on Twitter, also known as X, I guess, at the Green BJ. You can also find my Substack where some things come occasionally.
yeah.
If you just search Bryce Green newsletter, Bryce Green Substack, you should be able to find me. But mostly, you can find me on Twitter.
It's okay. But he does chop it up now. Don't come for Bryce because he brings receipts. Oh, that's right. And a sharp tongue. I'm not mad at you, but he takes all comers. I love it. I love it. I love it. Everybody, let's talk about the election. Um, Everything happened. You have Mamdani, who won. People are still talking about that. You have Omar Fateh, who really made quite the impression in Minneapolis. People don't want to talk about him. I suspect because he is black, quite frankly, because he won the nomination from the Democratic. Farmer Labor Party by caucus. That's how they do that in Minneapolis. He won, and then they withdrew the nomination from him. Wow. And then the Democratic establishment came in on him, but he still got north of 30% of the vote, while the mayor got about 40 plus percent of the vote. So he has made quite the impression, and I hope that he will continue on. But he also ran just like India Walton, who'll be with us in a couple of hours. India Walton did the same thing that Mamdani did, that Omar Fateh did in Buffalo, New York, several years ago. Many of us remember her. And then the Democrats tried to tried to throw her out, And so, hey, here we are. Here we are with the government shutdown. Oh my goodness, we've seen air traffic, a multi-billion-dollar industry, tied up every single day. Um, some people say that it will take years to get this right. You can destroy in a day what it takes years and generations to build, Bryce Green. And there's just a lot that is going on. I mean, people are very, very angry about uh, the 8 senators, two of whom who are leaving the U.S. Senate, that they all came together and really thwarted what people thought was great momentum that was built by the Tuesday elections for the Democrats. They said, "Wait a minute, I think we have the Republicans where we want them." Because they are now taking heat for these rising costs and rising healthcare costs. But we'll see where all of this goes. You tell me what your thoughts are about this government shutdown.
Hmm. Well, I think he really hit the nail on the head when you talk about the momentum that was developed over since last Tuesday, and since the Democrats really swept elections in most areas, where the significant ones were, of course, Mamdani being the most significant and the most covered one of those.
Mm-hmm.
With that sort of mandate, you would think that the Democrats, who were correctly standing up for better policy in the midst of the government shutdown, you would think that those people would see that as an opportunity to solidify their position, to use that massive election wave to as a bargaining chip, as some sort of bargaining power to push the Republicans to accept things like the ACA subsidies, which of course are really important to a lot of people, if
Mm-hmm.
not more than that.
Yeah.
But in fact, the Democratic Party capitulated, and that's the real headline. They had a big win, and they used that big win to justify a big failure, and that really is unacceptable. And you mentioned the airlines and the slowing of air traffic all over the country. Well, it looks like the Democrats, who were the ones who voted to, or who are siding with the Republicans on this. Um, well, a lot of them are taking major money from the airlines. This was just recently reported by Lever News, which I recommend everyone follow. They're a
Mm-hmm.
very an excellent DC focused news outlet. They covered it. They said that these Democrats are taking massive sums, some of the largest in Congress, from the airline industry. And of course, the airline industry is very upset at the disruptions to the flight schedules. And so that puts them on the side of Trump and the Republicans and the desire to reopen the government without any significant uh, concessions, without any significant policy benefits. All of this as the Republican Party was beginning to really feel the heat uh, from the from the shutdown. People talk about the harm that the shutdown has caused, but and that's very real. But that is a choice. It's a choice based on the Republican Party's unwillingness to extend basic care to the American people, and that's obviously their decision. If the Democrats stood for anything, it's the things that are ostensibly in their party platform: expanding healthcare to Americans, expanding the safety net, expanding SNAP benefits, things like that. They've proven time and time again that they don't really care about that. That they, as long as they're in power, even if they're not in power, as long as they have jobs and the money keeps flowing, they don't really care about anything. And I think the core reason for that is that, unlike the Republican Party, who has a very clear vision of what they want for the country in broad strokes, the vision is terrifying, it's horrible, it's disgusting, but they have that vision and they're willing to fight for it. Democrats don't really have that vision, at least on a leadership level. They don't see themselves as the guys who are going to bring in healthcare, who are going to solve a lot of the corporate control in America, who are going to take down the big tech monopolies. They don't have that vision. Their vision extends only so far as to how long they can stay in their own seats of power. If you're Chuck Schumer, who played a significant role in promoting the capitulation of the Democrats, you don't really care whether or not some healthcare subsidies get lost. You don't really care if all these wars are going on. You don't really care if Democrats have lost the mandate of the people by virtue of not fighting for them. You don't really care because you're a senator and you believe that your seat is safe and all the perks that come along with that. There's very little incentive. If you're a Democratic consultant, if you guys aren't winning elections, if you guys aren't uh, successfully delivering on policy for the people, that doesn't matter. Your job as a consultant isn't to make life better for people. It's to earn a paycheck by telling Democrats how they might be able to stay in power. As the incentive structures in the party and the apparatus that surrounds the party are so perverse that it seems that they really aren't concerned with the well-being of people. And Chuck Schumer, he might be facing a primary challenge. Who knows? Maybe AOC is going to do it. Who knows? But he tried to salvage his image by loudly and publicly voting no on the capitulation deal. But of course, the reporting from all over is that he was quarterbacking the whole thing. Some of the Democrats who were in secret talks with the GOP about this, and they said the leadership was informed the whole way through.
Well,
The
let me
whole
ask,
way through.
what does that say about the leadership? That they were in league with not just Republicans, because to me, it's not about partisanship. This is about principle and with whom you stand. Uh, is this not saying something deeper about who both parties really are? Because they don't represent people, it seems.
No, exactly. I mean, that's the core of the issue. Most people will tell you in America, who aren't diehard Republicans or diehard Democrats. Most people will tell you that neither party is really working for them. Most people in America will tell you that the government as a whole isn't working for them, and there's a good reason for that. The entire incentive structure of the American Congress isn't based on you do something good for the people and then you're rewarded. If you don't do anything good, then the voters will kick you out. That's actually not how it works. The way that the party structures and the winner take all election structures are, uh, the incentive is to ensure that you are uh, getting the support of the donor class. And typically, the donor class are the people who own businesses, the people who run major corporations, the investors, Wall Street, oil majors, all of them. It's like what I mentioned with the airlines, right? If the airline guys who give money to both parties in large amounts and the people who own the airlines are giving money to both parties in large amounts, well, then the interests of the airlines take precedence over the interests of the people. And so, if there's a shutdown in which Democrats are seemingly holding out for some positive policy wins, Well, if the airlines come in and say, well, that's not what we want, well, then their interests take precedence. It's as simple as that. I mean, you can call it the golden rule, the investment theory of politics, in which large major corporations, actors, billionaires, they're not so much, you know, just equal footing with all of us voters. They're actually investing in the outcomes that they desire, and that's the entire structure of our government. Every so often there'll be a politician who will go rogue and say something in favor of the public. You have your occasional Bernie Sanders type or Mamdani type, but by and large, those voices are marginal. That they're those names because they're exceptional. Those names because they went against the grain to some degree. I have my own critiques, but they went against the grain to some degree. The overwhelming norm is that the donor class wins. The donor class gets to decide what the policy is, and the people, the weak, they suffer what they must.
We're talking with Bryce Green about really the events over the past 48 hours, Bryce Green. Uh, Many people were expecting a government shutdown for the foreseeable, immediate future, I would say. And many people were prepared for it, or so it seems, Bryce Green. Um, and now, how do you think the public feel?
Well, I imagine the public is largely relieved to some degree that
Mhm.
the government shutdown is ending. Most people aren't following the day-to-day politics of,
Mhm.
what deals are on the table, how is policy made, what's going on with SNAP benefits, what's going on with the ACA subsidies. Most people aren't following that. Most people are far too busy, working the longest hours in the developed world for some of the lowest wages in the developed world for the worst healthcare in the developed world. That's what most people in America are concerned about. And so shutting down the government is a major disruption. So yeah, like some people aren't getting paid. Some people aren't making any money. Some people are lining up outside of food banks. And so the government shutdown ending is likely a relief to them. However, that does not mean that this is overall good for America, overall good for politics in general. Because if you're looking at politics closely, that's where you see the capitulation happen. That's where you see these ACA subsidies getting stripped away. The normal people, everyday people, they're not going to notice that until it directly hits their wallet. And because American politics is, complicated, and like I said, people are working extremely hard to simply make ends meet. They're not necessarily going to connect the end of the shutdown and the increase of their healthcare subsidies. So that's why shows like this and just being informed in general is so important for an ostensible democracy, so we can figure out how these things work. But like I said, I think most Americans are glad that the shutdown is ending. But the fact that they didn't get any gains and the Republican Party got everything they wanted, well, that's really a disaster on a social economic level.
Well,
I mean, right now they're going to war with the Supreme Court uh, about how much in SNAP benefits, how much in food stamps they want to give people. The courts ordered them to reinstate full SNAP benefits. Uh, the Trump administration argued that they don't want to. They want people to be hungry. They want people to starve. That's an extreme position, but millions and millions of Americans actually voted for this. Did they do? And millions of working class poor Americans voted for this. Did they realize that they were voting to cut their own benefits? Maybe, but I doubt it. And will they realize that their vote is the reason that now their kids are going to have less food on the table? Maybe, but in large part, no. That's that's just the way the world works. It's just the way the information cycle and, of course, people's busy schedules. That's how they work. But make no mistake, regardless, the Republican Party's agenda is really a disaster for the country, and the fact that the Democrats are unable to stop it is also a disaster for the country. It's like the party of nothing good can happen versus the party of only bad things will happen, and that's not really inspiring for the American people, and it's why more and more Americans have given up voting. More and more Americans have given up on politics in general, and simply turned inward. That's if you believe in the health of a democracy, if you buy the marketing material of the United States of America, well, that's kind of a major contradiction and a real problem that I think the political class and everyone else should be thinking about solving.
Do you think there'll be a tipping point when people, because at least 20 million people could lose their health care coverage come January, because that the open enrollment period will have ended, and so people will see just what they'll be needing to pay, and this is when the continuing resolution will come back up. We will have to vote on this budget once more.
Well, whether or not there'll be a tipping point really depends on what organizers are willing to do, what serious people who care about the well-being of Americans are willing to do. If left up to the leadership of the Democratic Party, no, there's going to be no turning point. They want business as usual. They want to keep, insider trading in the stock market. They want to keep the consultant fees going. They want to keep all of the perks of being in the political class going without really doing anything to rock the boat for the donor class, for the corporate class, for the elites. That's what they want. But there are plenty of people, hundreds and thousands of people around the country working hard, be it in the public interest think tanks, be it in your local activist havens, your local DSA, even the No Kings people. I mean, I have critiques of all of that, but they're at least ostensibly working for the betterment of society. And it depends on how they will be able to mobilize. If they are able to use the moment, use the crisis that is befalling the American people, in order to mobilize and organize and try and affect the political system with this people power, well, then there are many opportunities in which that might be successful. But if this opportunity is squandered, well, then there won't really be a tipping point. And every year, things are going to get worse, a little bit worse. The prices are going to get a little bit higher. You're going to be working a few longer hours. It'll be just a little bit harder to put food on the table. And there'll be people on the television telling you vote for me and I'll make it better without ever doing it. Uh, that's the downward spiral that America is in, and that can only be reversed by like those people I said, these organizers, the people who genuinely represent the working class here in America. Unions and all those people. They are the only people who can save us. We, the working class, are the only people who can save us, because relying on morons and grifters like Chuck Schumer and the like, it really won't get us far at all.
We're talking with Bryce Green, everybody, about the government shutdown, but we're also in the midst of Veterans Day, which used to be Armistice Day. And Armistice is an agreement that ends all fighting, right? But we've shifted from Armistice Day and Remembrance Day over in the UK to Veterans Day, the Fighters Day. And that's very, very interesting. It's kind of funny that we've had that shift, and now the Pentagon is informally known as the Department of War. And we've got, well, it's seemingly forever wars. Where do you want to begin? I mean, see, well, why don't we why don't we start in this hemisphere with Venezuela?
Well, I think that these issues are all linked, right? The
Mhm.
capitulation of the Democratic Party, the control of the corporate elite over American policymaking, extends not just to reducing SNAP benefits or cutting back health care or cutting Social Security benefits or what have you. It extends to the wars that are also draining this country. It extends to the aggressive policy in Venezuela. It extends to the blockade on Cuba. It extends to the continuation of the proxy war in Ukraine. It extends to the expansion of the military in order to contain China. It extends to the continued bombing of Somalia. It extends to the assistance of Israel in its genocide of the Palestinians. All of those areas are decided by the elite, the same class of people who decide that it's time to cut Social Security benefits. It's time to cut SNAP benefits. It's time to make the people suffer. These are all really the same group of interests. Starting in this hemisphere, I mean, you're seeing two more ships just in the last couple of days, two more boats being blown out of the water in these Obama-style drone strikes from the Trump administration. And of course, unlike Obama, who was assassinating people, wouldn't tell anybody about it. And if they were found out, they'd be like, "Oh, oops, my bad." The Trump administration is overtly saying, "Yes, we killed these people. Look at us. Look at how big our military is against these quote unquote narco terrorists." I mean, it's ridiculous. And of course, there's no evidence that any of these people were narco terrorists, were involved in narcotics trafficking or terrorism. And even if they were, well, that's a crime, and it should be handled by the legal system, by the criminal justice system. And none of those crimes are punishable by death. But the Trump administration has summarily executed them without trial, and we're probably never going to figure out who they are. And this is the 20th. This is the 19th and 20th boats that have been just blown out of the water by the Trump administration. Some of them in the Pacific, some of them in the Caribbean, but there's really been no serious opposition to this. Some people have, raised a stink like, "Oh, did you have congressional authority to do this? Well, maybe get that next time, blah, blah, blah." But no one's saying, well, it's wrong to murder people in boats without any due process for no good reason. It's that's the uniparty. That's the same apparatus that's controlling most of the American politics. And why are they doing this? Ostensibly they're saying, "Oh, we want to stop the flow of drugs and we want to stop the flow of migrants into America. We want to secure our borders, blah, blah, blah." That's obviously nonsense, right? If you want to stop the flow of drugs to the border, that happens at the border. Like simple as that. You don't go and blow up other countries so drugs won't get into your country. If it's a real problem, then maybe start with the supply side. Why are people getting all these drugs in the country? How is that happening? You don't go and murder people across the world for that. And if you want to stop the flow of migrants, the last thing you want to do is destabilize a Latin American country. Once you
Well,
do that, well, people are naturally going to leave, and that's going to cause knock-on effects that eventually lead to what's known as the migrant crisis, but it's really just the natural and predictable results of American foreign policy.
well,
And
is this really about drugs or is it about oil?
yeah, well, that's what I was getting to, Santita.
Okay.
The actual reason is largely it's multifaceted, right? The
Okay.
oil is a major part. Venezuela has the second largest oil reserves in the world, I believe, and that's something that is not under the control of America right now. It's under the control of the Venezuelan government, headed by the president Nicolas Maduro. Uh, the U.S. is gearing up for a major conflict on the global scale against Russia and China, and to fuel that conflict, to fuel the economics behind it, you're going to need control of oil resources. And so, overthrowing the Venezuelan government, replacing Maduro with someone compliant, well, that would be a major boon to that war effort. So that's one reason, but the other reason is also related to this global war effort. China and Russia have signed agreements, economic and military and political, with Venezuela, and that's against the U.S.'s desires. For a country in the Western Hemisphere to strike out a course on its own beyond what the American masters have said and have allowed, that's an offense. That's an offense to the masters of the universe, and so therefore they have to be punished. That's why we put this blockade on Cuba for the last 60, 70 years. That's why we sent terrorist armies into Nicaragua during the 80s, because they were charting an independent course. That's why we overthrew the governments of Guatemala. That's why we intervened in El Salvador. That's why we intervened in Panama. All of these issues are because the U.S. believes that it has the right to control every bit of politics in this hemisphere. And so Venezuela, having a socialist economy where the industry and finance and investment is largely controlled by the state, not entirely, but largely, that's an affront. That's an affront to the mafia don that is the American empire, and they have to be punished. And so that's those are the reasons why the U.S. is targeting Venezuela, and it didn't just start of course, now with the Trump administration, remember the the American attack on Venezuela, the economic attack began under Hugo Chavez.
Mhm.
In the 2000s. This is long going. It happened under Obama. It really started ramping up in Trump's first administration, when they appointed Elliot Abrams to head the Venezuela desk. Marco Rubio was also a major part of that, who is now the Secretary of State. That's when the major sanctions were placed on Venezuela, which prevented the country from interacting with the global financial system to a large degree. And so, as the price of oil fell for a number of reasons, the Venezuelan government, which relies heavily on oil revenues, was unable to adequately fuel its government and adequately finance the social programs that are required to sustain the major social benefits that happened under Hugo Chavez. And so the conditions deteriorated rapidly. After the first Trump administration, the Biden administration, the Nicolas Maduro reached out multiple times looking for some sort of peaceful settlement, some sort of easing of the sanctions, some sort of resolution that would allow it to coexist with its larger neighbor. The Biden administration refused. They simply refused to talk about it, and it was really a holding pattern of the Trump policies until Trump got back into office. And now that Trump's back in office, things are ramping up even more. Then they started bombing these boats. They started falsely accusing Venezuela of being involved in the drug traffic. They started sending aircraft carriers there. They started flying B-2 bombers over there. This is kind of insane. And one of the things that they're doing now is, for the first time in almost 2 decades, American soldiers are now training in jungle warfare in Panama. Venezuela, largely jungle country. They're saying, "Oh no, we're not training to invade Venezuela," but we've already seen reports, leaks directly from the Trump administration, that the administration is exploring options about what to do in Venezuela. They're exploring sending special forces in. They're exploring a Libya-style bombing campaign meant to decapitate the political and military class. They've also just talked about straight up kidnapping Nicolas Maduro by sending in, secret mercenaries or what have you. This is really insane behavior, and anyone would recognize it if another country was talking about that. I mean, imagine, imagine if, let's say, Colombia was printing in its newspapers, "Hey, should we go and bomb and destroy and kidnap Venezuelan leaders?" Or maybe no. Maybe there's another way that we can do that. Maybe we should just send aircraft carriers over there. Maybe we should send in troops. Imagine if another country was doing that. We'd be like, "That's crazy. That's crazy talk." But since we're America, since we're the empire, we can do whatever we want, and it's normalized.
Well,
And so
well,
that's
that
a
last,
policy that is costing the Americans a lot of money,
yeah,
and it's
I
probably
think
going to end up costing American lives.
well, and my question is, in
No, I can't currently
2025.
hear you. I don't know what
Oh,
happened.
can you hear me now? Can you hear me
Test,
now?
test, test.
Can you hear me now? Oh my
I
goodness.
lost you somehow.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you, just keep on.
Well, let
And
me refresh and see if I can come back in.
okay, well, we're talking with Bryce Green about, we've been talking about the elections, we've been talking about the government shutdown. Did you know that I knew that there was a connection between the airlines losing all of this money and the shutdown ending, because this is, we always have to follow the money, right? Okay, but now we've got these international incursions that cost us dearly, not just money but goodwill. Can you hear me, Bryce Green?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
I'm back in
well,
business.
but let me ask you this question, because we have it seems like we're fighting everywhere, and we're always, we fall in and out of love with Russia. World War II, we're in love. Post World War, we're out of love. Reagan, we're out of love. Then we fall in love with Raisa and Mikhail. And then after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we fall back out of love. I mean, we're in and out. This is very costly, by the way, I think. Help me to understand where Russia is in all of this, because I was reading Business Insider Africa. They're news from their African desk. And there's much consternation about Russia, Russia's footprint on the African continent, particularly in the Sahel. Uh, you know, and these nations that have demanded their freedom from France. They demanded their money back. They demanded their gold. I mean, and they've become really symbols of freedom and liberty on the continent. And and they are working with Russia now. Well, does that concern uh, America? Just given the fact that the wealthiest continent on Earth is the African continent. I mean, each country alone is uh, makes American corporatists, well, covetous of their resources, right? To put it very gently. Where is Russia in all of this, and why are we always at odds? Well, why at this particular point in history are we at odds with them? Is that it?
Yeah, well, the American competition with Russia has roots going back, 100 years. I mean, after the Bolshevik Revolution, America was part of the group of countries that actually invaded Russia. America
Mhm.
sent 10,000 troops over there to invade Russia and try and take down the Bolshevik Revolution. But we don't have to go through that whole history. I mean, if we're just looking at now, why over the last decade or so, maybe 2 decades, has Russia been framed as one of America's primary adversaries? And therefore anything Russia does, that's something that concerns us and we have to respond to it, be it in Ukraine or Africa or its relationship with China. Well, the biggest reason is that around a decade ago, it became clear to American planners that the unipolar moment, the situation in which America was the dominant power and it was unable to be challenged by anyone, that time was coming to an end. It was coming to an end for a number of reasons. One of them was the rise of China as an economic powerhouse. The other was the continued integration of Russia with its European neighbors, especially Germany. Now,
Mm.
it's been a major tenet of American foreign policy, of American grand strategy. Grand strategy, of course, is the term for how are we going to best dominate the world. But it's been a tenet of that strategy that you want to prevent Russia and Germany, especially, and Europe in general, from forging close economic ties. Because with the Russian hydrocarbons, natural gas and oil and others, and the German engineering and German mechanical know-how, that could serve as a major counterbalance to the U.S. industrial power. That's something that if you want to run the world, you don't really want. And so this has been these fears have been exacerbated by the rise of China and their ability to have economic independence, and especially their ability to offer development paths for countries around the world, which allows them to choose between Western led development and independent development. In the past, in this unipolar moment, they simply could not choose. They had, if they wanted to develop, they had to take out loans from the IMF. They had to, make deals with the World Bank and the U.S. government and what have you, which of course led to all sorts of political problems. The fact that China's offering an alternative, and the fact that Russia was beginning to serve as a counterbalance to American power and was becoming normalized within Europe, meant that about a decade ago, America had to decide what it was going to do. While they were busy destroying the Middle East in a fit of rage and a fit of insanity and a fit of Zionist neocon fueled fervor, uh, these other countries were doing something different. And so about a decade ago, Russia proved that it did not have to listen to the U.S. When it listened to the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, refused to ratify the U.S. A U.S. bombing campaign on Syria, and instead got involved to defend the Assad government. And you can make all sorts of arguments against Assad as a person, but I'm sure no one would prefer that Syria be taken over by ISIS, which was the U.S. plan at the time, to use ISIS to get rid of Assad. Of course, the The Russians saw that as a disaster, and Syria being relatively close to Russia and a history of U.S. funded jihadis on their border, they felt compelled to get engaged, which actually halted for a time American plans on that stage. Uh, American planners were deeply concerned about that. American planners were very worried that Russia was being restored some degree to superpower status, to a superpower status that could compete with America's unipolarity. And so pretty quickly you started seeing Russia being framed as this big evil enemy. You had this whole hoax where Russia stole the American election and gave it to Donald Trump, which I really hope by now people have gotten over. I really hope none of your listeners still believe that. They might, but that's a story for another time.
Mhm.
But they started framing Russia in these terms. It really started getting exacerbated after the U.S. overthrew the Ukrainian government in 2014. Russia got involved in the conflict there for obvious reasons. You don't want to have NATO troops and missiles on your border, especially when NATO's talking about how much they hate Russia. And so
Mhm.
all these things shifted American foreign policy priorities away from the global war on terror fully. They're still involved, but not completely, and more towards some sort of containment of Russia. Now, in China, like I said, they were able to offer some sort of new economic development for the rest of the world. In terms of purchasing power parity, which is
Mhm.
one way of measuring GDP that accounts for the real industrial output, the American economy started trailing behind China. And in fact, I believe it was in 2017 or maybe I'm getting the dates wrong, but it was around the mid 2010s where China's GDP, in terms of purchasing power parity, surpassed the United States.
Yeah.
And if
And the
you're an
economy
American,
now bigger.
right, that meant their economy was bigger. It was able to do more things. It produce more stuff, and even though China's a big country, that was major for it because it had came from really a backwater in the
Mhm.
1940s up to a industrial powerhouse. Well, this
Wait a minute.
worried the
And
Obama administration so much that they initiated what was called the pivot to Asia,
right, I
which
mean,
was
and the
about
opium
containing
war,
China.
right, and the opium wars. I mean,
Oh
because
goodness, yeah.
they have quite the history, right, with the West. I mean, I don't think that
Right,
people really understand that when they see the West, they go, "You got to be serious. You have tried to destroy us." And I think
right.
that there's lingering resentment about that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that period of the Opium Wars, British intervention, gunboat diplomacy. I mean, in China, they refer to it as the century of humiliation. This
Mhm.
period between like 1800s, 1850, and
Mhm.
around 1950, when the Communist Party successfully pushed out the Imperial Chinese and relegated them to Taiwan and took control of
Mhm.
the country. They call that period the century of humiliation for good reason. Yeah, they
Mhm.
were deliberately infected with opiate addiction.
Mhm.
The opium wars were essentially a way for the British and the West at large to force opium addiction on the Chinese for their own profit. You
Does
know,
that
the
sound familiar? Does that sound like something we've heard before?
yeah, I mean it's precisely the accusation that Americans are lobbying against or levying against China today, that China's deliberately sending opium to America
No,
to
but our own
for
government
their
has
own
done
profit.
it. Our own government has done it here in
Right,
corporations.
but the fact that China has been able to dig its way out of that period
Yeah.
and become a global superpower with the ability to build ships on a scale that the American Navy could really only dream of in their wildest dreams. The fact that they're able to uh, successfully coexist with its neighbors to a large degree without going to wars, without setting up military bases all over the world, dividing the world between Northcom, CENTCOM, Southcom, AFRICOM. The fact that they've been able to do that has really shown a new path of development for countries all around the world. And one of the big things that China has done is they've lifted nearly 1 billion people out of poverty. Extreme poverty in many ways has been eliminated in China. Over that same period, extreme poverty in America has dramatically increased. Well, that's a real challenge to the American unipolar moment. That's a real challenge to America's quest for global dominance. And so, there's there's every reason for the American imperial planners, the people who control both parties, the people who run the corporations, run finance, run all that. There's a very good reason for them to be freaked out by it, and that has really shaped American views toward China. Now, during the first Trump administration, Trump started these trade wars, right? You remember the first trade war where Trump was levying all sorts of economic penalties against China. Well, that obviously didn't work. But during the second Trump administration, he started it again and started levying insane amounts of tariffs on Chinese goods and products, starting causing port fees for Chinese-made ships. All these sorts of things meant at harming Chinese industry, ostensibly for the purpose of boosting American industry. Well, the problem is that doesn't work. The fact is that American industry is completely unable to compete with Chinese industry, and the monopoly that China has on rare earth elements means that all China has to do is flip the switch, and then the American military essentially ceases its core functioning. Because if they can't get rare earth elements, that means you can't build the chips necessary to run all these fancy computers and devices. Almost all of those are controlled by China, and so by brandishing that leverage, the Chinese government was able to get Trump to capitulate and reverse almost all of the economic warfare measures that it had taken. That's a pretty significant shift in the balance of power. It shows that China is able to contend with America, is able to, uh, act as a superpower and defend itself against economic attack, which is something that most countries cannot say.
Well, I know we only have, well, we have about 10 minutes left here, and I want to give them to you because an area of the world I think that Americans don't focus on enough is Africa, right? The continent. As we mentioned the Sahel, that region, which has received a lot of attention because they have demanded independence from a great imperial power, France. But there's something interesting happening in Somalia that you wanted to talk about today.
Oh, right. I mean, oh, I guess this was coming out on Wednesday, so maybe Monday, a few days ago, the American military launched its 90th airstrike on Somalia this year, and this is a record, right? This is ostensibly part of the global war on terror, blah blah blah. They stopped even telling us who they're hitting. They stopped even making excuses for who they're targeting. So who knows what they're doing?
Mhm.
But the 90th, I mean that would be major news in a real functioning, democracy. Why are we striking this country 90 times? This is more than uh, Obama. This is more than Bush. This is more than Biden. This is even more than Trump's first administration. Why are they doing that? Well, one of the reasons that they're doing it is that this global war on terror is a product of American making its own problems worse. The people that they're ostensibly fighting are only in existence because of an American intervention, American support of an Ethiopian intervention in Somalia around 2 decades ago. And so they created a system of chaos. They destabilized the country, and then when militias started forming that were then counter to their interest, they then use that as justification to get deeply and more deeply involved. And it's really surprising that this hasn't received a peep of coverage in the American media. In fact, I don't think that any of the strikes this year have received not even a mention in the papers of record, the New York Times, Washington Post, and I think this is a symptom of a broader silence on the continent of Africa and the toll of U.S. wars in general. If you're able to bomb a country in silence, like a secret bombing, well, what else are you able to get away with? Trump has been very loud about the bombings of Venezuela, but they've been very quiet about the bombings in Somalia. And the continent of Africa is especially strategically important because in the Sahel region, there are independence movements countries that are trying to be independent of the West, independent of France and the United States, who are really shifting the balance of power in that region. And they're really in that position because of the way American foreign policy has treated Africa in general. It's been treated as really a site of extraction, like essentially a mine, and it's been treated as a dumping ground for weapons. After the Obama intervention in Libya in 2011, well, the Americans flooded millions of dollars of weapons into these jihadi groups that then started pinballing all around the region, overthrowing governments or destabilizing governments. The Americans started these training programs to try and train a bunch of officers in different African militaries. Many of them went on to overthrow their governments. In fact, even the ones they don't like received U.S. training. And so this region is really on the target list of American grand strategy planners. And the fact that they are developing closer relationships with Russia is one more reason that American empire planners are deeply concerned about this whole situation. It's really worrisome the way that Trump is talking about all these different areas in Africa as targets. I think last week they started making accusations about a Christian genocide
In Nigeria.
in Nigeria. In Nigeria, of course, one of Africa's most populous countries, attacking it would be, of course, a disaster, a moral and humanitarian and military disaster, quite frankly.
Why would it be a military disaster?
Well, I think we've seen the inability of America to wage a serious military campaign. We saw that with the Houthis; they're unable to defeat, a non-state actor in a tiniest in one of the poorest countries, a very small country. They were completely unable to do it. If they were to go to war in Nigeria, well, it would just be bombing campaign with troops that wouldn't be able to be supplied. It wouldn't go well. The idea of an American attack on Nigeria is, I mean, just laughable. I mean, they could attack it from the air and destabilize it, blow it up, but that doesn't mean they'd be able to, intervene to change the political situation in any positive way. I think that the rhetoric that surrounds it is largely a symptom of this global competition. America is feeling like it's losing its footing in the world, and they're lashing out in different ways all over the world. They're lashing out in South America. They're lashing out in Africa. They're supporting this genocide in Palestine. They sneak attack bombed Iran. They're continuing their military buildup in the Caribbean, and they're continuing their military buildup in East Asia.
Well, then my question is, I've got about 4 or 5 minutes left here. Is America losing its footing in the world?
Yes. The short answer is yes, because time is on the side of the people who are developing. Time is not on the side of the people who are declining. And even if you look at places like the Rand Corporation or the major foreign policy think tanks, a lot of them talk in terms of America's declining power. The unipolar movement is being challenged. America can no longer do whatever it wants in the world without challenge. That's losing its footing. That's losing the ability to coerce other countries into ridiculous economic deals, into debt peonage, into agreements that ensure that American corporations are the beneficiaries of the natural resources of these countries. Countries no longer are forced into those agreements, and so American corporations are naturally worried about the long-term stability of their entire business models. Right? If once they've been able to strip the resources out of heartland America, once they've been able to reduce the countries that are effectively its vassal states, once they're able to reduce those into stripping them of their industrial capacity and public goods, well, the natural next step for an empire is to look abroad, to look to other countries to extract. If they're not able to do that, well, then the entire system collapses. And so that's why America is so fearful of Russian and Chinese influence in the world. And that's why they're so hell bent on ensuring that other countries are not able to independently develop, are not able to seriously choose a course that isn't approved by Washington. And I think that this is really the major struggle of our time. You're going to hear me talk about it all the time. You're going to hear all these geopolitical commentators talk about it all this time. But that's what it is. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was one of the key foreign policy thinkers in the American establishment. He was Jimmy Carter's, I believe, national security advisor,
Hmm. He was.
and he wrote a book in the '90s called "The Grand Chessboard" that
Mhm.
really laid out much of what I'm saying, and very clear terms, unapologetic, pro-empire terms. That you have to control these areas, you have to control the South Caucasus. You can't. You
Mhm.
have to maintain the Western Hemisphere. On Europe, it said that if the vassals are colluding, that's a problem. If Europe was able to coalesce into some independent policy coalition, well, that would be a disaster for the American empire. So all of these areas in the world should be thought of as a grand chessboard, and much of the political goings on in the individual countries are chess moves done by the Americans in order to maintain their power. And the countries that are fighting against that, the multipolar world, as it's usually called, well, they're on the other side of this chess match. They're saying, well, we don't want to live under the thumb of America, and we're playing a long game to ensure that that doesn't happen. That's what's framing all geopolitical struggles at all times. That's how you should interpret the issues in Taiwan. That's how you should interpret the issues in Ukraine. That's how you should even interpret the issues in Gaza, where Israel is, acting as a sort of a rabid dog of empire. It's in some ways it's a tail wagging the dog, and in some cases the dog wagging the tail. But the Zionist neoconservatism is a core part of the ideology that animates American militarism. And it explains all of these conflicts. And I think that the American public should be more aware of this, should be understand why their conditions are deteriorating, understand why why is it that we have $1 trillion military budget, but we don't have enough money for SNAP benefits, for food stamps. Why is that? Well, there's a very real answer. And if you're an American imperial planner, that's a rational choice. People can go hungry at home. You're not going to suffer any any electoral consequences. You're still in power because the only people they can vote in are people that you control. And so it makes sense to put all this put all this money into military expenditures. It's totally rational for them, but it's insane if you're a normal person who cares about what the world is, coming to.
Before you go, got a couple, literally 2 minutes. Bernadette wants to know, what is the financial interest in Somalia? You know, where, whenever we go someplace, they have something we want.
In Somalia, I'm not actually certain about the specific financial interest. I know that the country was a major target in the global war on terror as part of the Middle
Mhm.
East and North Africa Greater Campaign, and it's been
So
host
it might be
to.
more geopolitical.
It's
Where,
geopolitical. I mean, this is not a case that I've studied extensively, and there are
Mhm.
places where you can go. Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com has written
Yes.
quite a bit about it, and we're looking more at uh, the the bombing campaign that they have. I'm sure if we look any with any sort of depth, you'll see resources, you'll see players, American or otherwise, that have substantial financial interest in what goes on in Somalia. But this is really just regardless of what the interests are. It's clearly an expression of American imperialism. The fact that we're able to bomb a country 90 times is pretty significant.
1 minute. What would you like to know? What would you like for us to know before you go?
I'd like you to know that despite all this horrible stuff going on in the world, despite all the militarism, despite the empire, despite the capitulation of the Democrats, despite all of that, you, a person, still have a role to play in making things better, in fighting for a world that you're able to that you want to see envisioned. You have the power to organize with the people around you, organize your community, try and fight against the political situation that's going on now. It can be very uh, disempowering sometimes to see all the horrible things going on. But one of the things that keeps me going is activism, is organizing, is getting organized. And I think that that should be at the forefront of everyone's mind.
Bryce Green, everybody. Of course, you are on Substack and you're on X, where he likes to chop it up. How can we get to you on X?
You can follow me at the Green BJ.
And that's green with an E, everybody. Coming up, we're going to talk about Armistice Day. At least that's what it used to be known as. It's now Veterans Day, which really uplifts the Pentagon, which is now known informally as the Department of War. Let's talk with people, veterans, about war and peace. When will we give peace a chance? Everyone who goes to war says that that is what we need to do. Will we do it? Let's talk about it in just a few minutes at the bottom of the hour on the Santita Jackson Show. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.